A stepmother abandons twin girls in a landfill. Years later, the girls do something remarkable. Lightning slashed through the night sky, briefly illuminating Sophie's tense face. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles were white. She glanced into the rearview mirror, observing the two small figures asleep in the back seat. Claire and Anne, identical 5-year-old twins, slept soundly, unaware of the storm of emotions consuming their stepmother. Sophie was 35, but at that moment she felt the weight of a lifetime. Just 3 years earlier, she had been an independent woman with a promising career and dreams of conquering the world. Now she was trapped in a life she had never wanted, caring for 2 children who were not her own. The sound of rain pounding on the car's roof seemed to echo the chaotic thoughts in her mind. "Thomas," she murmured, recalling the heated argument they had before he left on his business trip. "Just 2 weeks, Sophie," he had said, kissing her absently on the cheek while grabbing his suitcase. "I'm sure you can take care of the girls for that time." 2 weeks. For Thomas, it was just the blink of an eye. For Sophie, it was an eternity. Each day was a battle against the resentment growing in her chest, slowly suffocating her. The rain intensified, turning into a deluge. Sophie slowed down, the car's headlights barely piercing the curtain of water ahead. She knew she should go back home, put the girls to bed, and pretend to be the perfect stepmother everyone expected her to be. But something inside her had broken. With a sudden movement, she turned the car onto a dirt road, the wheels skidding in the mud. The jolt woke Anne, who sat up sleepily. "Aunt Sophie?" The child's voice was full of confusion. "Where are we going?" "Shh, go back to sleep, sweetheart," Sophie replied, her voice trembling slightly. "We're just taking a little drive," Anne obeyed, snuggling back next to her sister. Sophie felt a pang of guilt, but quickly smothered it. She could not turn back now. The car advanced slowly along the muddy road, the headlights briefly revealing rusty signs and piles of trash. The putrid smell of the landfill invaded the car, making Sophie gag. She stopped the vehicle, the engine idling softly. For long minutes, Sophie remained motionless, hands still gripping the steering wheel. The rain kept falling mercilessly, as if the sky itself were weeping for what was about to happen. With a trembling sigh, she got out of the car. The rain soaked her instantly, plastering her hair to her face. Sophie opened the back door, looking at the 2 sleeping girls. Claire and Anne were identical even in the smallest details. Golden curls, delicate freckles on their noses, rosy lips slightly parted in sleep. For a moment, Sophie hesitated. Images of the girls laughing, playing in the yard, asking her to read bedtime stories flooded her mind. But then, like poison, the resentment returned, spreading once more. These were not her daughters. This was not her life. With mechanical movements, Sophie picked up Claire in her arms. The girl stirred but did not wake. Sophie carried her out of the car, her feet sinking into the mud. She walked a few yards and placed Claire under a gnarled tree. Its canopy offered little protection from the rain, but it was better than nothing. Returning to the car, Sophie repeated the process with Anne. When she placed the second girl beside her sister, Anne opened her eyes. "Aunt Sophie," she murmured, confused. "It's raining." "I know, sweetheart," Sophie replied, her voice cracking. "Stay here with your sister. I'll be right back." It was a lie, and part of her hated herself for it, but Sophie could no longer bear it. She turned and ran back to the car, ignoring Anne's sleepy call. Inside the vehicle, Sophie started the engine with trembling hands. Through the fogged windshield, she could see the 2 small figures under the tree. Anne had woken Claire, and both were looking in her direction, confused and frightened. "Forgive me," Sophie whispered, tears finally winning the battle. With a strangled sob, she shifted gear and accelerated, the wheels spinning in the mud before finding traction. The car advanced along the muddy road, leaving behind 2 small silhouettes in the rain. Sophie did not look back. She could not. If she did, she knew her resolve would break. As she drove back toward the city, the storm raging around her, Sophie felt something inside her shatter irreparably. She had done the unthinkable, the unforgivable, but there was no going back. From that rainy night onward, Nothing would ever be the same. Lightning split the sky once more, illuminating the road ahead. Sophie sped up, leaving behind not only two innocent children, but also the woman she once was. The rain continued to fall, washing away her tracks, but nothing could wash away the guilt that would consume her forever. Dawn arrived cold and grey, the previous night's rain replaced by a dense fog that draped over the landfill like a ghostly shroud. Claire was the first to wake, her blue eyes blinking in confusion at the desolate landscape around her. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming, a terrible nightmare from which she would soon awaken in her warm, safe bed. "Anne," she whispered, gently shaking her sister. "Anne, wake up!" Anne groaned, turning in the mud before opening her eyes. The shock on her face mirrored Claire's as reality struck them both. "Where are we?" Anne asked, her voice trembling with fear. "Where's Aunt Sophie?" Claire looked around, expecting to see the car or some sign of their stepmother, but all she saw were mountains of garbage and debris, stretching as far as the eye could see. The smell was nauseating, a mixture of decay and chemicals that turned their stomachs. "I don't know," Claire answered, trying to sound brave for her sister. "But we'll find someone to help us." Holding hands, the twins stood up, their soaked and dirty nightclothes clinging to their small bodies. They began walking, their bare feet sinking into mud and refuse. "Aunt Sophie!" Anne shouted, her voice echoing strangely in the heavy air. "Daddy!" "Someone, please!" Claire joined the calls, but as they ventured deeper into the labyrinth of trash, despair began to take hold. Rats scurried among the mounds of debris, and occasionally they heard the flapping wings of scavenging birds. Fear grew with each step. After what felt like an eternity of walking, Anne stumbled, falling to her knees. She began to cry, large sobs shaking her small frame. "I want to go home, Claire," she sobbed. "I'm scared." Claire hugged her sister, her own tears mixing with Anne's. "It'll be all right," she promised, though she had no idea how. "We'll find help." It was at that moment they heard voices. Adult voices. "Look over there, Pierre," a female voice exclaimed. "They're children." Claire and Anne turned to see a couple approaching quickly. The woman, Marie, was short and sturdy, with greying hair escaping from a colourful scarf. The man, Pierre, was tall and thin, with a scruffy beard and gentle eyes. Marie knelt in front of the twins, her face a mixture of concern and shock. "My God, what are you doing here, little ones?" Anne immediately threw herself into Marie's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Claire, always the more cautious of the two, took a step forward. "We got lost," she explained, her voice trembling. "Our Aunt Sophie. She brought us here last night and—" She could not finish, tears finally conquering her attempt to be strong. Marie looked at Pierre, a silent understanding passing between them. What would they do with two clearly abandoned children? "We can't leave them here," Marie finally said, her voice firm. "It's far too dangerous." Pierre scratched his beard, conflict evident on his face. "What if someone comes looking for them?" "We could have trouble with the authorities." Marie shook her head, determined. "It doesn't matter, they're just children, Pierre. We can't abandon them like whoever brought them here did." After a moment's hesitation, Pierre nodded. He bent down, picking up Anne, while Marie did the same with Claire. "Let's take them home," he said softly. "We can decide what to do later." The journey back to Marie and Pierre's makeshift shack was long and difficult. The twins, exhausted and traumatized, fell asleep in the arms of the strangers who had found them. When they finally reached the small structure of wood and cardboard they called home, Marie and Pierre exchanged worried looks. "What will we do with them?" Pierre asked quietly, gently placing Anne on their only mattress. Marie covered the girls with a worn but clean blanket. "We'll care for them," she answered simply, "at least until we figure out where they came from." Meanwhile, miles away, Thomas was returning from his business trip, eager to see his daughters and his wife. The taxi stopped in front of the elegant suburban home, and Thomas jumped out, grabbing his suitcase. Something felt wrong. The house was too quiet, too dark. "Sophie," he called, opening the front door. "Claire, Anne, Daddy's home." Silence. With his heart racing, Thomas searched the house, calling for his family. Each empty room increased his panic. When he reached the twins' bedroom and saw the untouched beds, fear turned to pure terror. Trembling, he picked up the phone and dialed the police. "Please," he begged when someone answered. "I need to report a disappearance. My wife and my daughters, they're gone." As the calm voice on the other end asked questions, Thomas collapsed on the floor, tears finally overcoming him. Where were his girls? Where was Sophie? What had happened in his absence? Night fell over the city, shrouding both the luxurious suburb where Thomas waited desperately for news and the humble shack in the outskirts where Claire and Anne slept, exhausted and unaware of the chaos their absence had provoked. Destiny had intertwined these lives in unimaginable ways, and the consequences of that rainy night were only beginning to unfold. The sun had barely risen when Thomas set out on his frantic search. His eyes, red and swollen from a sleepless night, scanned every street, every alley, every park, In his hands were photos of Claire and Anne, their innocent smiles frozen on paper, painfully contrasting with the despair now dominating his life. "Have you seen these girls?" he asked everyone he met, tirelessly. "They're my daughters. Please, help me find them." Meanwhile, miles away, Sophie drove aimlessly, her face marked by tears and remorse. Guilt consumed her like an uncontrollable fire. What had she done? How could she have abandoned two innocent children? With trembling hands, she turned the car around and headed back to the landfill. Daylight made the place look even more desolate. Sophie ran back and forth, shouting the girls' names until her voice failed. "Claire!" "Han!" Her voice echoed, answered only by the oppressive silence of the landfill. There was no sign of the twins. Panic seized her. Where could they have gone? On the outskirts of the city, Claire and Anne woke in a strange environment. Marie and Pierre's shack was cramped and simple, but it was clean and welcoming. The smell of coffee and toasted bread filled the air. "Good morning, little ones." Marie smiled gently, offering them bowls of porridge. "Did you sleep well?" Claire looked suspiciously at the food, but Anne, always more impulsive, took the bowl and began to eat eagerly. "Where is our Aunt Sophie?" Claire asked, her voice small and scared. Marie and Pierre exchanged worried glances. How could they explain the inexplicable to two children? "We don't know, dear," Marie replied softly, "but you're safe here with us until we find your family." Meanwhile, the police had launched an intensive investigation. Detectives searched Thomas's home for clues, interviewed neighbors and reviewed security cameras. "Mr. Thomas," Detective Rodriguez said, his face serious, "we found something you need to see." Thomas followed the detective to the study. On the computer screen, surveillance footage showed Sophie leaving the house in the middle of the night. The twins asleep in her arms. Thomas's world collapsed. No, it can't be," he murmured, incredulous. Sophie would never do that. But the images did not lie. Sophie, the woman he loved, had disappeared with his daughters. The betrayal hit him like a punch to the gut. Determined, Thomas redirected all his energy into finding the girls. Sophie was now secondary. His daughters were all that mattered. Days turned into weeks. Thomas used every resource at his disposal: private detectives, rewards, media appeals. His life and business took a back seat. Nothing mattered except finding Claire and Anne. In the outskirts, the twins slowly adjusted to their new life. Marie taught them to sew, while Pierre showed them how to fix small objects found in the trash. "You have skillful hands," Pierre smiled, watching Claire repair an old radio. Anne, meanwhile, created beautiful drawings with colored chalk scraps Marie had found. The girls found comfort and security with the couple, but the longing for home persisted. At night, curled up on their makeshift bed, they whispered to each other. "Do you think Daddy is looking for us?" Anne asked. Claire squeezed her sister's hand. "I'm sure he is. He'll find us." Meanwhile, Sophie wandered the streets, a shadow of her former self. Remorse gnawed at her insides. She could not return to Thomas, not after what she had done. She could not face the consequences of her actions. In a moment of despair, she considered turning herself in to the police, but fear paralyzed her. Instead, Sophie disappeared into the city's shadows, becoming just another homeless figure, hiding from her past and from herself. The police investigation continued, but without concrete results. Detective Rodriguez hit dead ends at every turn. "It's as if they vanished into thin air," he said, frustrated, to his partner. "It doesn't make sense." Weeks turned into months. The story of the missing twins gradually faded from the headlines, replaced by new tragedies and dramas. But for Thomas, for Marie and Pierre, and for Claire and Anne themselves, time seemed frozen on that fateful night. Thomas, once a successful businessman, was now a shadow of himself. His relentless search consumed him. He barely ate, barely slept. Every phone call, every email could be the lead that would bring him to his daughters. "I will not give up," he whispered to himself every night, looking at photos of Claire and Anne. "I will never give up on you." In the outskirts, Marie and Pierre faced their own dilemmas. They had grown attached to the girls, but they knew they could not keep them forever. "We should go to the police," Pierre suggested one night after the twins had gone to sleep. Marie sighed, running her hand over her tired face. "And say what? That we found 2 children in the landfill and decided to keep them. They'll accuse us of kidnapping." The fear of losing the girls and facing legal trouble kept them stuck in a painful stalemate. Meanwhile, Sophie lived on the streets, tormented by nightmares and remorse. Every child she saw reminded her of Claire and Anne. Every police siren made her tremble with fear. One night, lying on a park bench, Sophie looked up at the stars and whispered, "Forgive me. Please, let someone have found them. Let them be safe and loved." Fate had woven a complex web, connecting lives in unexpected ways. Thomas in his relentless search. Sophie, lost in her own hell of guilt. Marie and Pierre, torn between love for the girls and fear of the consequences. And at the center of it all, Claire and Anne, 2 little survivors adapting to a world they should never have known. Night fell over the city, enveloping broken hearts and fragile hopes in its dark embrace. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same again. Time, relentless in its march, had left its mark on all involved in this story. 5 years had passed since that fateful night, each day bringing subtle yet profound changes. In the outskirts of the city, the sun had barely risen when Claire and Anne, now 10 years old, left the small shack they called home. Their faces, once chubby and innocent, now bore the first signs of the hard life they led. But their identical deep blue eyes still shone with surprising resilience. "Come on, Anne," Claire called, adjusting the worn cap that protected her blonde hair from the sun. "We need to reach the recycling depot before the others." Anne nodded, grabbing her makeshift handcart. The wheels squeaked in protest as she pushed it, starting another day of collecting recyclable materials. As the girls searched through trash cans and piles of refuse, their minds wandered. Claire, always practical, thought about the objects she could fix. Her skill with her hands had become legendary in the community. Old radios, broken toys, even small appliances. Nothing seemed immune to her ability to repair. Anne, on the other hand, saw the world through artistic lenses. Every piece of colored plastic, every discarded scrap of fabric, was an opportunity to create something beautiful. Her fingers itched to transform trash into art, giving new life to what others had thrown away. "Look, Claire," Anne exclaimed, holding up a piece of colored glass. "This will be perfect for my mosaic." Claire smiled at her sister, admiring her ability to find beauty even in the toughest circumstances. Meanwhile, miles away in an office once impressive, Thomas stared at a pile of documents with weary eyes. The years of relentless searching had taken their toll. His face, once vibrant and full of life, now bore deep wrinkles and permanent dark circles. "Mr. Thomas," his secretary called softly from the door, "Detective Rodriguez is on the line." Thomas straightened up, a flicker of hope briefly lighting up his dull eyes, but as so many times before, the call brought only disappointment. Another dead end, another lead that went nowhere. Hanging up, Thomas looked at the photo on his desk. Claire and Anne smiled back, frozen in time. How many birthdays had he missed? How many precious moments. "I will not give up," he murmured, touching the photograph with trembling fingers. "I will never give up on you." But reality was cruel. His business, once prosperous, now struggled to stay afloat. Thomas's obsession with finding his daughters had driven away clients and partners. Still, he could not stop. Every cent he earned went to private detectives, rewards, and ads. The girls were all that mattered. Back at the shack, Marie coughed violently, her frail body shaking with the effort. Years of hard work and exposure to the elements had taken their toll. Pierre held her hand, fear evident in his eyes. "We need to take you to a doctor," he murmured, more to himself than to Marie, but both knew they could not afford proper treatment. And there was always the fear that seeking help would alert the authorities about the girls. The love they felt for Claire and Anne kept them trapped in a cruel dilemma. When the twins returned from their daily collection, they found Pierre trying to make Marie eat some soup. "What happened?" Claire asked, immediately taking on a protective stance. "Nothing, dear." Marie tried to smile, but was interrupted by another coughing fit. Anne approached, her large eyes full of concern. "Can we help? Maybe I can draw something to make you feel better." Marie smiled weakly, touched by the innocent offer. "That would be wonderful, my love." While Anne ran to get her drawing materials, Claire approached Pierre. "It's serious, isn't it?" she asked quietly. Pierre nodded, unable to hide the truth from the perceptive girl. "We're doing the best we can," Claire frowned, her mind already working on solutions. "I'll fix more things," she declared. "We can sell them and get money for medicine." Pierre's heart tightened. The girls were already working so hard. It wasn't fair that they had to carry this burden too. But he knew he could not stop Claire once she set her mind on something. Far away in a dark alley, Sophie huddled under a thin, tattered blanket. Her once silky, well-groomed hair was now tangled and dirty. Her once vibrant eyes were now dull and haunted. Every day was a battle against the remorse that consumed her. Every child she saw on the street made her wonder, could that be Claire or Anne? Had they survived? Guilt was a constant weight, crushing any hope of redemption. Sophie had considered countless times turning herself into the police, confessing her crime. But fear paralyzed her, and so she remained trapped between the desire to atone and the terror of the consequences. In her darkest moments, she found herself murmuring the girls' names like a prayer. "Claire, Anne, forgive me. Please be well. Please be alive." As the day drew to a close at the shack, Claire worked tirelessly on an old radio, determined to make it function again. Anne put the finishing touches on a lovely drawing for Marie, using colorful chalk scraps she had found. Pierre watched the girls with a mix of pride and worry. They had grown so strong, but how long could they maintain this life? How long could they be protected? In Thomas's office, the lights remained on. He examined yet another report, desperately seeking any clue that could lead him to his daughters. In the streets, Sophie curled up in her corner, tormented by nightmares of the past and terrors of the future. Night fell over the city, wrapping everyone in its darkness. But even in the deepest shadows, small sparks of hope persisted. In a shack in the outskirts, two girls fell asleep, their dreams still untouched by their harsh reality. Somewhere, fate continued weaving the threads that might one day reconnect these shattered lives. The shrill sound of the bell announced the end of another school day. For most students, it was a moment of relief and joy. For Claire and Anne, now 15, it was the start of their daily race, to escape before trouble found them. "Hey, you dumpster girls!" Mariana, the leader of the popular crowd, shouted down the corridor. "Find anything good in the trash today?" Claire clenched her fists, her blue eyes flashing with anger. Anne, always more sensitive, lowered her gaze, trying to become invisible. "Ignore them," Claire murmured, pulling her sister's arm. "They're not worth our time." But the cruel words followed them all the way to the school gates. "Careful not to catch any diseases, huh? We don't want you contaminating the whole school." The laughter echoed painfully in their ears as they ran into the street. It had always been like this. Since they had secured a spot at the local public school 3 years ago, the twins had faced daily prejudice and cruelty from classmates who didn't understand their reality. "It's not fair," Anne whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "We didn't choose this life." Claire hugged her sister, her heart heavy. "I know, but we'll change that. You'll see. We're stronger than they think." It was true. Despite the hardships, the twins had flourished in surprising ways. Claire, with her mechanical talent, had caught the attention of Mr. Johnson, the owner of a small neighborhood repair shop. "Girl," he had said, watching her fix a motor his mechanics had declared lost, "you have a gift. How about a job after school?" For Claire, it was as if the heavens had opened. A job meant money. Money to help Marie, still fighting her illness. Money to buy decent school supplies. Money to dream of a better future. Anne, on the other hand, had turned her artistic talent into a small source of income. Her creations, made from recycled materials, had garnered admirers at the local craft fair. "Your pieces tell stories," an elderly lady had commented, admiring a mosaic made of colored glass shards. "It's as if each fragment has a life of its own." Anne smiled, feeling truly seen for the first time. Her creations were more than simple objects. They were pieces of her soul, tangible manifestations of her dreams and hopes. While the twins worked hard to forge their own paths, miles away in a luxurious office, Thomas signed another international contract. His eyes, though tired, glowed with fierce determination. "With this expansion," he explained to his partner, "we'll be able to widen our search network. More resources, more people looking." His partner hesitated, worry evident on his face. "Thomas, it's been 10 years. Don't you think maybe it's time to—" "To what?" Thomas cut him off, his voice as sharp as steel. "Give up on my daughters? Never. Every cent we earn, every new contact, brings us closer to finding them. I know they're alive, I feel it." His partner sighed, knowing it was useless to argue. The search for the twins had become Thomas's driving force, pushing him to expand his business in ways no one could have foreseen. It was as if he were building an empire just to tear it down in search of his daughters. Back in the outskirts, Pierre faced his own dilemmas. Marie's illness, the rising costs of caring for the girls, the constant struggle to survive, all of this had led him to make decisions he never imagined. "Just this once," he murmured to himself, loading a sealed box into a waiting car in a dark street. "Just until we can afford Marie's treatment." But Pierre knew deep down that there was rarely just once when it came to illicit deals. The money was good, better than anything honest work could provide. And with Claire and Anne growing up, expenses only rose. "What am I doing?" he asked himself on sleepless nights, the weight of guilt crushing his chest. But then he heard Marie's coughing, saw the hopeful faces of the girls, and knew he would do anything to protect his improvised family. It was into this complex scenario that Gabriel, a young and dedicated social worker, stepped in. Assigned to investigate reports of child labor in the region, he soon became intrigued by the twins' case. "There's something strange here," he commented to his supervisor, flipping through the scant records he had managed to gather. "Two girls, living with a couple who aren't their legal guardians, without proper documentation." "Gabriel," his supervisor sighed, "we have dozens of similar cases. The system is overwhelmed." But Gabriel couldn't let it go. There was something in those girls' eyes, a mix of strength and vulnerability that touched him deeply. "I need to dig deeper," he decided. "There's a story here, and I'm going to uncover it." As the sun set, painting the sky orange and pink, these lives continued their course, intertwined by fate in unimaginable ways. Claire, returning from the repair shop with grease-stained hands but a proud heart, dreamed of the day she could buy a real house for her family. Anne, counting the money from her art sales, imagined a future where her work could touch hearts around the world. Thomas, poring over maps and reports in his office, renewed his silent promise never to give up, to keep searching until his last breath if necessary. Pierre, hiding the smuggled money in an old mattress, prayed that his actions would not bring terrible consequences to those he loved. And Gabriel, reviewing his notes by the light of a desk lamp, felt he was on the brink of a discovery that could change many lives. Night fell over the city, covering everyone in its dark mantle. But even in the deepest darkness, small lights of hope continued to glow. In a shack on the outskirts, two young girls fell asleep, their dreams still intact despite their hardships. In a lonely mansion, a father refused to give up. And somewhere between these two worlds, fate continued weaving its intricate web, preparing to unite these loose threads in ways no one could predict. Adversities had shaped Claire and Anne, turning them into resilient and determined young women. But the future still held many challenges. How would they face the revelations to come? How would they react when the past they did not know finally caught up with them? Only time could answer. For now, they continued their journey, day after day, facing each obstacle with the strength that only those who have known true hardship possess. And without knowing it, with each step they took, they drew closer to a destiny that would change their lives forever. Gabriel stared at the computer screen, his heart pounding. After weeks of meticulous investigation, cross-referencing data and following tenuous leads, he had finally reached a shocking conclusion. The twins living in the shack with Marie and Pierre were not just undocumented girls. They were Claire and Anne, the missing daughters of businessman Thomas Almeida. With trembling hands, Gabriel picked up the phone. He hesitated for a moment, aware that the call he was about to make would forever change several lives. Finally, summoning his courage, he dialed, "Hello, Mr. Almeida. This is Gabriel Silva, a social worker. I have information about your daughters." On the other end of the line, Thomas felt his world stop. 10 years of relentless searching, 10 years of frustrated hopes and false leads. Could it really be? Where was all he could manage, his voice choked with emotion. Hours later, Thomas found himself standing before a small shack on the city's outskirts. His heart pounded so hard, it felt as if it would burst from his chest. Gabriel stood beside him, trying to prepare him for what lay ahead. "Mr. Almeida, it's important you understand. The girls have lived here for 10 years. This is the only life they know now." But Thomas hardly heard him. His eyes were fixed on the shack's door, which now slowly opened. Claire was the first to step out, her blue eyes wide with surprise at the well-dressed stranger. Anne followed close behind, instinctively hiding behind her sister. Thomas felt tears rolling down his face. There they were, his girls. No longer the little children he remembered, but young women. Yet he would recognize them anywhere. Claire, Anne. His voice failed him. The twins exchanged confused looks. Who was this man? How did he know their names? It was then that Marie appeared at the door, breathless and pale. Her eyes widened at the sight of Thomas, and she knew instantly that the day she had feared had come. "Girls," she said softly, "I think we need to talk." In the hours that followed, long-buried truths came to light. Marie, with tears in her eyes, confessed that she had always known the girl's true identity. "I saw the posters, the news on TV," she explained, her voice trembling. "But you were already ours. We couldn't lose you." Claire and Anne listened in shock, their minds struggling to process the avalanche of information. Thomas was their father. They had another life, a life stolen from them 10 years ago. "Why?" Claire finally asked, her voice laden with emotion. "Why were we abandoned?" Thomas, his heart breaking at the pain in his daughter's voice, tried to explain about Sophie, about the night everything changed. But words seemed inadequate, incapable of bridging the gap of 10 lost years. Anne, always the more sensitive, began to cry quietly. What now? What happens to us? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. Thomas wanted to embrace his daughters, take them home, recover lost time, but he saw the fear and confusion in their eyes. To them, he was a stranger. I have a big house," he began hesitantly. "There's room for everyone if you want. Marie, Pierre, you two." But before anyone could respond, the door burst open. 2 police officers entered, followed by Pierre in handcuffs. "What's happening?" Claire shouted, instinctively placing herself between the officers and Marie. "Pierre Souza, you're under arrest for involvement in a smuggling ring," one of the officers announced coldly. Chaos erupted in the small shack. Marie collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably. Anne shrank into a corner, overwhelmed by everything. Claire, always the protector, tried simultaneously to comfort Marie and demand explanations from the officers. Thomas watched the scene, feeling utterly powerless. This was not the reunion he had dreamed of for 10 long years. Gabriel, realizing the situation was spiraling out of control, tried to intervene. "Please, everyone calm down. We can resolve this in a civilized manner." But emotions were running high. Years of secrets, lies, and pain exploded all at once, leaving everyone stunned and vulnerable. Meanwhile, miles away, in a small shelter for the homeless, Sophie served soup to those in need, as she did every night for years. It was her form of penance, a desperate attempt to atone for her sins. That's when she heard, coming from a small TV in the corner. Breaking news: the Almeida twins, missing for 10 years, were found living on the city's outskirts. Businessman Thomas Almeida reunited with his daughters today. The soup ladle slipped from Sophie's trembling hands, shattering on the floor. Her world spun. Claire and Anne were alive. Thomas had found them. "My God," she whispered, staggering backward. "What have I done?" Back at the shack, the situation finally began to calm down. Pierre had been taken away, leaving behind a devastated Marie and 2 teenage girls in shock. Thomas, gathering all his courage, approached his daughters. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said softly. "I don't expect you to accept me as your father right away. I just ask for a chance to know you, to be part of your lives." Claire and Anne exchanged glances. 10 years of living in poverty, fighting daily for survival, had made them cautious. But there was also a spark of curiosity, a repressed desire to know their origins. Can we think about it?" Claire finally whispered. Thomas nodded, his heart breaking a little more, but understanding the need to give his daughters space. "Of course. Take all the time you need. I'll be here waiting." As night fell over the city, lives once separated by a decade began the painful process of reconnection. In the small shack, Claire and Anne held each other, seeking comfort as always. Marie wept silently, fearing the uncertain future. Thomas, sitting in his luxurious car parked on the street, looked at a faded photo of 2 smiling little girls, barely believing he had finally found them. And in a distant shelter, Sophie faced the demons of her past, knowing it was only a matter of time before the whole truth came to light. Fate had intertwined these lives in unimaginable ways, and now finally, the knots were starting to unravel. What did the future hold for this shattered family? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The lawyer's office was silent, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional clink of a coffee cup being set down. Thomas, with deep, dark circles under his eyes, listened intently as his lawyer explained the legal process ahead. "It will be a difficult battle, Mr. Almeida," Dr. Mendez warned. "Technically, the girls were abducted, but they've lived with Marie and Pierre for 10 years. There are strong emotional ties there." Thomas nodded, his heart heavy. "I understand, but they're my daughters. I want to give them the life they always should have had." Meanwhile, back at the shack, Claire and Anne faced their own emotional turmoil. Sitting on the narrow bed they shared, the twins spoke in hushed tones, trying to process the revelations of recent days. "What do you think?" Anne asked, her voice trembling slightly. "About him, our father," Claire sighed, running a hand through her hair in frustration. "I don't know, Anne. He seems nice, rich. He could give us a better life, I guess." "But what about Marie?" Anne protested, tears shining in her eyes. "She raised us all these years. We can't just abandon her." The dilemma weighed heavily on both of them. Loyalty to Marie, the woman who had raised and loved them, clashed with the possibility of a life they had never imagined possible. In the tiny kitchen, Marie coughed violently again, her frail body shaking. Her already precarious health seemed to worsen each day since Pierre's arrest. The stress of recent weeks took its toll. Claire jumped up the moment she heard the cough, running to help. "Marie, you need to rest," she insisted, guiding the older woman back to bed. Marie smiled weakly, caressing Claire's face. "My strong girl," she murmured. "Don't worry about me. You two need to think about your future now." Marie's words, though spoken with love, only increased the weight of the decision facing the twins. Gabriel, the social worker, did his best to navigate these turbulent waters. He spent hours in meetings trying to find a solution that met everyone's needs. The girls need stability, he argued during a meeting with Thomas and his lawyers. An abrupt transition could be traumatic. We need a gradual plan. Thomas reluctantly agreed. Every fiber of his being wanted to bring Claire and Anne home immediately. But he knew Gabriel was right. After 10 years, he couldn't just uproot them from the only life they knew. Meanwhile, in a small rented apartment across town, Sophie lived her own personal hell. Since hearing of Thomas's reunion with the twins, she could barely eat or sleep. "Should I turn myself in?" she murmured to herself, pacing the tiny apartment. "They deserve to know the truth. But what if they hate me?" The fear of rejection battled the desire for redemption. Sophie knew that eventually the truth would come out, but the courage to face the consequences of her actions seemed always out of reach. Back at the shack, Claire and Anne decided to take matters into their own hands. With Gabriel's help, who provided them with some documents and basic information, the twins began to investigate their past. "Look at this," Claire said, pointing to an old newspaper photo. "That's us, with Thomas, and that must be Sophie." Anne studied the image, her eyes fixed on the smiling face of the woman who had abandoned them. Why did she do it? Why leave us in that landfill? It was the question that haunted everyone, and one for which no one seemed to have a satisfactory answer. As days passed, the legal battle intensified. Thomas, determined to regain custody of his daughters, faced resistance from a system that questioned his ability to care for two teenagers after so many years of separation. "They need stability, routine," argued the social defense lawyer. "Mr. Almeida is practically a stranger to them." But Thomas did not give up. He hired the best lawyers, presented detailed plans on how he would integrate the girls into his life, even offered to buy a house for Marie near his mansion. "I'll do whatever it takes," he declared firmly during a hearing. "They are my daughters, and they deserve the best I can offer." Claire and Anne watched it all with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. The idea of a life of comfort and opportunity was tempting, but the fear of the unknown was equally powerful. "What if we don't adapt?" Anne whispered to Claire one night. "What if he realizes we're not the perfect little girls he remembers?" Claire hugged her sister, feeling the weight of the responsibility she always carried. "We'll stay together, no matter what," she promised. "I've always taken care of you, and I always will." As the case garnered media attention, the pressure on all involved increased. Marie, already weakened by illness and Pierre's absence, struggled to remain strong for the girls. "You must do what's best for you," she insisted, though her heart broke at the idea of losing them. "Don't worry about me." But how could the twins not worry? Marie was the only mother they truly knew, the woman who had loved and protected them for a decade. Gabriel, seeing the stress the situation caused everyone, especially the twins, proposed a temporary solution. "What about a transition period?" he suggested. The girls could spend a few days a week with Thomas while keeping regular contact with Marie. It would give everyone time to adjust gradually. The proposal was met with caution, but also a glimmer of hope. It was a chance to build bridges between two worlds that seemed irreconcilable. Meanwhile, Sophie continued her internal struggle. Each piece of news about the case, each photo of the twins in the papers, felt like a knife in her heart. She knew her silence only made things worse, but fear paralyzed her. "They're better off without me," she tried to convince herself. Telling the truth now would only cause more pain. But deep down, Sophie knew the truth always finds a way. It was only a matter of time before her past caught up with her. As this chapter closed, the lives of all involved remained in a delicate balance. Thomas, determined to reclaim his daughters. Marie, fighting illness and fearing the loss of her adopted family. Claire and Anne, torn between two worlds, trying to find their place. And Sophie, hidden in the shadows, carrying a secret that could change everything. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the battles, both legal and emotional, were far from over. The path to healing and reconciliation would be long and difficult, but perhaps, just perhaps, There was hope on the horizon. The sun had barely risen when Claire slipped out of the shack, determination shining in her blue eyes. Weeks of careful investigation had led her to this moment. Heart pounding, she headed for the public library, where she had spent hours searching old newspapers and online records. Meanwhile, Anne, always more compassionate, had decided to help at a local shelter. "We need to give something back," she told Claire. "We were lucky to have Marie and Pierre. Not everyone has that chance." This morning, Anne was ladling soup to those in need, her gentle smile brightening the shelter's somber atmosphere. That's when her eyes fell on a middle-aged woman with graying hair and a haunted look. "Are you okay, ma'am?" Anne asked, noticing how the woman's hands trembled as she held the bowl of soup. Sophie, for it was her, looked up and froze for a moment. It was like seeing a ghost, a younger version of herself. I'm fine," she stammered, quickly looking away. Anne, intrigued by the woman's reaction, decided to sit beside her. "Want to talk? Sometimes it helps." While Anne unknowingly approached her past, Thomas faced a different battle. He had called a meeting with Marie and Pierre, recently released on bail, at his lawyer's office. "I want the truth," Thomas demanded, his voice trembling with contained emotion. "How did you find my daughters? Why didn't you return them?" Marie, pale and visibly shaken, began telling the story of that fateful night at the landfill. Pierre, holding her hand, occasionally added details. As the truth emerged, Thomas felt a mixture of gratitude and anger. Gratitude that they had saved and cared for his daughters. Anger that they had denied him 10 years of fatherhood. "You had no right," he finally said, tears streaming down his face. "No," Marie agreed softly. "But love doesn't always follow rules, Mr. Almeida. We loved them as if they were our own." While this difficult conversation unfolded, Claire made a shocking discovery at the library. Hidden among piles of old newspapers, she finally found the missing piece of the puzzle. "No way," she murmured, staring at an article detailing the search for Sophie Almeida, Thomas's wife, who disappeared the same night the twins did. Sophie's photo stared back at her, and Claire felt her world spin. Determined to confront this new truth, Claire raced to the shelter where she knew Anne would be. She needed to share this discovery with her sister. Arriving there, Claire found a surreal scene. Anne chatting animatedly with a woman who was the living image of the photo she had just seen. "Anne!" Claire called, her voice trembling with emotion. That woman?" Sophie, upon hearing Claire's voice, stood up abruptly, spilling the soup bowl. The noise attracted everyone's attention. "Who are you?" Anne asked, confused by Claire's and Sophie's reactions. At that moment, Gabriel, alerted by Thomas about the girls' discoveries, arrived at the shelter. Perceiving the tension in the air, he quickly took control of the situation. "I think we all need to talk," he said calmly. "There's a lot to clarify." In a matter of hours, everyone involved in this complex plot gathered in a conference room downtown. Thomas, Jules, Marie, Pierre, Claire, Anne, Sophie, and Gabriel. The silence was palpable, loaded with repressed emotions and unspoken truths. Gabriel, acting as mediator, began. "We're here to clarify the past and, hopefully, find a path for the future. Sophie, I think you have something to say." Sophie, visibly shaking, looked at the twins. 10 years of guilt and remorse spilled into her words. I'm your mother," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "and I'm the one who abandoned you that night." The confession fell like a bomb in the room. Thomas paled, Marie sobbed softly, and the twins were paralyzed with shock. Sophie continued, detailing that night of abandonment, the years of torment and guilt. When she finished, she was sobbing uncontrollably. It was then that 2 police officers entered the room. Gabriel had called them, knowing Sophie's confession would lead to her arrest. "Sophie Almeida, you are under arrest for abandoning Claire and Anne Almeida," one of the officers announced, approaching with handcuffs. What happened next surprised everyone. Claire, always the pragmatic and tough one, stepped forward. Her usually firm voice trembled slightly. "Wait," she said to the officer. Then, turning to Sophie, she continued, "What you did was terrible. You caused us pain and suffering you can't imagine. But looking at you now, I realize you hurt yourself most of all. You carried this weight for years. I hope you find peace and can forgive yourself one day, just as we're learning to forgive." Anne, tears in her eyes, joined her sister. "Your action led us down a hard path, but it also taught us about compassion and the importance of family, whatever shape it takes. I hope you use this time to reflect and become a better person." The room fell silent. The maturity and compassion shown by the twins left everyone astonished. Thomas, tears in his eyes, embraced his daughters, overwhelmed with pride. Marie and Pierre watched, a mixture of sadness and admiration on their faces. Sophie, visibly moved by her daughter's words, allowed the officers to cuff her. But before being taken away, she looked at Claire and Anne one last time. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're so much stronger and better than I ever was." As Sophie was led out, Gabriel looked at the remaining group. "That was unexpected," he said softly. "But I think it's a start towards healing and maybe reconciliation." Thomas held his daughters tighter. "I'm so proud of you," he murmured. Claire and Anne exchanged glances, a silent understanding passing between them. The road ahead would still be difficult, full of challenges and complex emotions, but at that moment, they had taken the first step toward healing. The room slowly emptied, leaving behind the echo of revealed truths and lessons learned. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, there was a spark of hope in the air. A hope that, perhaps, out of this story of pain and separation, a new family could emerge, united not only by blood, but by understanding and forgiveness. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of the temporary room Claire and Anne now occupied in state custody. The twins, still groggy, surveyed the unfamiliar surroundings with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "It's strange, isn't it?" Anne murmured, hugging her pillow. "Having a room just for the two of us." Claire nodded, her mind already calculating the next steps. "It's temporary," she reminded her sister. Until they decide what to do with us." The judge's decision to place them under temporary state custody was a shock to everyone. Thomas had argued vehemently against it, but the judge insisted the girls needed a neutral environment to process everything that had happened. That very morning, Thomas arrived at the care home, determined to spend time with his daughters. He brought photo albums, old toys, anything that could help rebuild the lost connection. "Look," he said gently, showing the girls a photo. "This was the day you learned to walk. You were first, Claire. Always so determined." The twins looked at the image, a swirl of emotions in their faces. It was strange to see evidence of a life they didn't remember, with a father they barely knew. "Why did you never give up looking for us?" Anne suddenly asked, her voice trembling slightly. Thomas felt his heart tighten. "Because you're my daughters," he replied, tears in his eyes. "There's nothing in the world I wouldn't do for you." Claire, always more reserved, watched the interaction in silence. She wanted to believe, wanted to embrace this promise of unconditional love, but years of struggle and distrust made her hesitate. Meanwhile, miles away in a solitary cell, Sophie faced the demons of her past. The twins' words of forgiveness echoed in her mind, a painful contrast to the guilt that consumed her. "How could I do that?" she asked herself, silent tears running down her face. "How could I abandon my own daughters?" The prison psychologist, Dr. Oliver, worked tirelessly with Sophie, helping her navigate the turmoil of emotions. "Regret is the first step, Doctor," Oliver reminded her gently. "Now we need to focus on how you can redeem yourself, even from a distance." Sophie nodded, determined to do whatever it took to earn her daughter's forgiveness. In the city, the hospital was in upheaval. Marie had been rushed to the hospital, her health deteriorating rapidly. Pierre, recently released after serving a reduced sentence, rushed to Marie's side. "I'm here, my love," he whispered, holding her frail hand. "We'll get through this together." When news reached the twins, it was like a punch to the stomach. Marie, the only mother they truly knew, was fighting for her life. "We need to see her," Claire insisted, her normally calm voice now filled with urgency. Gabriel, ever the silent guardian, quickly arranged a hospital visit. Thomas, seeing the desperation in his daughter's eyes, offered to drive them. In the hospital room, the constant beep of heart monitors filled the air. Marie, pale and weak, opened her eyes upon hearing the girls' voices. "My little ones," she whispered, a weak smile lighting her tired face. Anne immediately ran to embrace her, tears flowing freely. Claire, trying to remain composed, held Marie's other hand. "You'll get better," Claire said firmly, as if she could make it true by sheer will. Thomas watched from the corner of the room, his heart aching. He could see the deep love between Marie and the girls, a painful reminder of the years he had lost. Pierre, noticing Thomas's presence, approached him hesitantly. "Thank you for bringing them," he said softly. "It means a lot to Marie, and to me." The two men exchanged a look of mutual understanding. Both loved the girls, both wanted what was best for them. Perhaps, they realized, they didn't have to be enemies on this journey. In the weeks that followed, Claire and Anne began therapy sessions with Dr. Renata, a psychologist specializing in childhood trauma. "How do you feel about having so many parental figures in your lives now, Doctor?" Renata asked gently during a session. Anne bit her lip, thoughtful. "It's confusing," she admitted. "Thomas, Dad, he tries so hard, and I want to let him in, but we're scared," Claire finished, surprising everyone with her sudden honesty. "What if he gives up on us? What if we're not what he expects?" Dr. Renata nodded understandingly. "It's natural to have these fears. You've been through so much. But remember, there's no deadline for building relationships. It's okay to take it slow." The therapy sessions became a refuge for the twins, a place where they could freely express their fears, hopes, and confusion. Thomas, determined to prove his commitment, visited the girls daily. He brought stories of their childhood, shared memories from when they were little, and most importantly, he listened. He listened to their lives with Marie and Pierre, to their dreams and fears. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, barriers began to fall. A smile here, a hesitant hug there. Small moments of connection that fueled Thomas's hope. In prison, Sophie worked tirelessly on her rehabilitation. She began writing letters to her daughters, letters she might never send, but which helped her process her feelings and remorse. "My dear Claire and Anne," she wrote one night, tears staining the paper, "there are not enough words to express my regret. But I promise you, and myself, that I will spend the rest of my life trying to be someone worthy of your forgiveness." In the hospital, Marie fought bravely, her determination fueled by love for the girls she had raised. Pierre was by her side constantly, determined to right past wrongs and be the support she needed. Claire and Anne visited whenever they could, bringing drawings, flowers, and most importantly, their love and gratitude. As days passed, a new dynamic began to form. Thomas, Pierre, and Gabriel formed an unlikely alliance, all united by the desire to provide stability and love for the twins. "They need all of us," Gabriel observed during a meeting. "Each of you has an important role in their lives." Slowly, painfully, the bonds began to rebuild. They were not perfect, they were full of scars and doubts, but they were real and grew stronger each day. One night, as Thomas drove the twins back to the care home after a visit to Marie, Anne surprised everyone by timidly asking, Could we see your house someday? Where we used to live?" Thomas felt his heart leap. "Of course," he replied, struggling to contain the emotion in his voice. "Whenever you're ready." Claire, in the back seat, remained silent, but Thomas noticed a small smile on her lips through the rearview mirror. It was a small step, but significant. The road ahead was still long and uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, there was genuine hope that this fragmented family could one day become whole again. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen of the Almeida's mansion as Claire came down the stairs, her blonde hair tied in a messy ponytail. She found Thomas already at the table, reading the newspaper with a steaming mug beside him. "Good morning, Dad," she murmured, still getting used to the word that, a year ago, had felt so strange on her tongue. Thomas looked up, a warm smile lighting his face. "Good morning, sweetheart. Ready for another day at the workshop?" Claire nodded, a spark of enthusiasm in her eyes. In the past months, she had found her place in Thomas's company, transforming a once-abandoned workshop into a small innovation center. "I'm almost done with the prototype of the new filtration system," she commented, filling her own mug. "If it works, it could revolutionize water treatment in underprivileged communities." Thomas felt a surge of pride. Claire had inherited not only his aptitude for business, but also a genuine desire to make a difference in the world. Upstairs, Anne was absorbed in her own creative universe. Her room, once impeccably tidy, was now an organized chaos of recycled materials, paints, and tools. "Anne," Thomas called softly, knocking on the slightly open door, "breakfast is ready." Anne looked up from her artwork, paint stains on her face. "Just one more minute, Dad. I'm almost done with this piece for the exhibit." Thomas entered the room, marveling at the transformation Anne had created. From discarded plastic, metal, and glass, she had constructed stunning sculptures that told stories of resilience and renewal. "It's incredible," he commented, admiring a particularly striking piece that seemed to capture the essence of their family's journey. "You have a gift, Anne." Anne blushed at the compliment, still adjusting to the idea of having a father who supported her dreams without question. As the twins prepared for their respective days, Thomas reflected on the year that had passed. It had been an emotional roller coaster, full of challenges, tears, and gradually, genuine moments of joy. The transition had not been easy. There were nights of nightmares, days of tense silence, and moments when Thomas feared he would never truly connect with his daughters. But with patience, therapy, and unwavering love, they had slowly built a new family dynamic. Thomas adjusted his work schedule, prioritizing time with the girls. Family dinners became sacred, as did weekend adventures, exploring the city, or simply spending the day watching movies at home. In his company, Thomas found new purpose. Inspired by Claire's project, he redirected part of his company's resources into social and environmental initiatives. "Let's make a difference together," he had told Claire when she first presented her idea. The proud smile on her face was worth more than any million-dollar contract. Meanwhile, miles away, in a small apartment adapted for her medical needs, Marie watched the sunrise, a cup of hot tea in her trembling hands. Her recovery had been slow and difficult, but the determination to see her girls thrive kept her fighting. Although she could no longer care for them daily, Marie took comfort in their regular visits and long phone calls. Pierre entered the room, carrying a tray with breakfast. His time in prison had changed him, making him kinder and more thoughtful. "The girls called last night," he said, sitting beside Marie. "Anne is nervous about the exhibition." Marie smiled, her eyes shining with maternal pride. "She'll do wonderfully. I always knew that girl had an artist inside her." Though the family dynamic had changed drastically, Marie and Pierre remained an important part of the twins' lives. Thomas, overcoming his initial resentment, recognized the crucial role the couple had played. Now they formed a unique extended family, united by their love for the twins. In the state prison, Sophie faced another day of her sentence with renewed determination. The past year had been one of intense introspection and hard work on her rehabilitation. "Good morning, Sophie, Doctor," Oliver greeted as she entered the therapy room. "How are you feeling today?" Sophie offered a small smile. "Anxious, but hopeful. Today we start the new literacy program for the inmates, right?" Dr. Oliver nodded, pleased with Sophie's progress. In recent months, Sophie had become a positive force in prison, initiating educational and support programs for other inmates. "Your daughters would be proud," Dr. Oliver commented softly. Sophie felt tears form in her eyes. Although she still had no direct contact with Claire and Anne, she worked every day to become someone worthy of their forgiveness. Back at the Almeida's mansion, the day was in full swing. Claire had left for the workshop, determined to finish her project before meeting with potential investors. Anne, on the other hand, was turning the living room into an improvised gallery, preparing to give the family a preview of her exhibit. Thomas watched his daughters with a mix of pride and nostalgia. They were young women now, so different from the little girls he remembered, yet equally extraordinary. Later in the day, the house filled with cheerful voices. Marie and Pierre arrived for Anne's preview, bringing warmth and comfort that the twins associated with their early years. "Oh, Anne," Marie exclaimed, tears in her eyes at the sight of the sculptures. "It's simply magnificent." Anne hugged Marie tightly, grateful to have so many people who loved and supported her. Claire arrived shortly after, exhausted but radiant. "We did it," she announced, hugging Thomas. "The prototype worked perfectly. The investors are on board." The room erupted in celebration. Thomas embraced his daughters, amazed at the incredible women they had become. As the family gathered for a celebratory dinner, Thomas could not help but think about how their lives had changed. A year ago, they were strangers united by blood and trauma. Now they were a real family, with all the complexities and joys that implied. The twins still had their moments of doubt and fear. The trauma of their past had not completely disappeared. But with each day, each small victory, they grew stronger. Claire found purpose in using her intellect and skills for good, and discovered that her art could not only heal her own heart but also touch others. Thomas learned to be not just a provider, but a present and loving father. Marie and Pierre, though no longer the primary guardians, remained pillars of support and love. And Sophie, even behind bars, was slowly rebuilding her life and seeking redemption. As night fell and the house grew quiet, Thomas found the twins on the porch, gazing at the stars. "I am so proud of both of you," he said softly, joining them. Claire and Anne smiled, linking their arms with his. "Thank you for not giving up on us," Claire murmured. "Thank you for giving us a home," Anne added. Thomas felt his heart overflow with love. The journey had been long and difficult, but there, under the stars, with his daughters at his side, he knew every challenge had been worth it. The future still held difficulties, but now they would face them together, as a family. The shrill sound of the alarm clock cut through the morning silence. Claire and Anne, now 18, awoke almost simultaneously, exchanging nervous glances. It was their first day at Crownfield Academy, an elite institution Thomas had carefully chosen. "Ready?" Claire asked, her voice betraying a slight tremor. Anne nodded, though her stomach was tied in knots. "As ready as we'll ever be." Downstairs, they found Thomas in the kitchen, preparing an elaborate breakfast. "My college girls!" he exclaimed, his broad smile barely concealing his own anxiety. Breakfast passed in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The twins, despite their intelligence and talents, feared they wouldn't fit into this new world of privilege and high expectations. Upon arriving at the Academy's imposing gates, Claire and Anne hesitated. "Remember," Thomas said softly, "you're extraordinary. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." With one last hug, the twins stepped inside, facing curious stares and whispers from other students. Meanwhile, Thomas headed to the office, his mind already turning to the problems awaiting him. An unexpected crisis had arisen. One of his biggest international contracts was at risk of cancellation. "Sir," his assistant intercepted him as he entered. "The board is demanding an emergency meeting. They're talking about drastic cuts to compensate for potential losses." Thomas felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. He had promised himself and the girls that he would be more present, not let work consume his life again. But now everything he had worked for was on the line. At Crownfield Academy, Claire found herself captivated by a lecture on environmental engineering. The professor, Dr. Green, spoke passionately about innovative solutions to global problems. "That," Claire thought, feeling a surge of enthusiasm, "is what I want to do." Anne, meanwhile, was in the art class, lost in her own world as she worked on a project. Her teacher, Mrs. Oliver, observed with growing admiration. "Anne," she called after class, "have you considered studying art abroad? There's an incredible program in Paris that would be perfect for you." Anne's eyes widened. Paris, a dream she hardly dared to have. That afternoon, when the twins returned home, they found Thomas on the phone, his voice tense as he discussed numbers and strategies. He barely looked up when they entered, immersed in his professional crisis. "Dad?" Claire called hesitantly. Thomas raised a hand, signaling them to wait. The twins exchanged worried glances, painfully reminded of the days they felt invisible and neglected. Miles away, Marie and Pierre were sitting in their small living room, an atmosphere of expectation in the air. "Are you sure about this?" Pierre asked gently, holding Marie's hand. Marie nodded, her eyes bright. "I've never been so sure. Taking care of Claire and Anne was the most rewarding experience of my life. I want to give that love to another child who needs it." Pierre smiled, feeling his heart expand. The idea of adopting a child, creating a family in their own way, felt right. Meanwhile, in a small room at a rehabilitation center, Sophie faced her reflection in the mirror. Today was the day. After years of incarceration and intensive therapy, she was being released. "Remember," Dr. Oliver said gently, "take it slow. Rebuilding relationships takes time." Sophie nodded, her heart a mix of fear and hope. She had worked hard to become a better person, to deserve a second chance. But would her family be willing to give it? Back at the Almeida's mansion, tension was palpable. Thomas finally ended his call, looking years older. "Girls," he began, his voice tired. "I'm sorry, It's okay," Claire interrupted, her voice cold. "We're used to not being a priority." Thomas felt as if he'd been punched. "No, that's not it. It's just that—" "Paris!" Anne exclaimed suddenly, unable to contain her excitement any longer. "Mrs. Oliver thinks I should apply to an art program there." The ensuing silence was deafening. Thomas looked from Anne to Claire, seeing the spark of excitement in one and determination in the other. "That's wonderful, Anne," he finally managed to say. "And you, Claire? How was your day?" Claire hesitated, then talked about the environmental engineering lecture, her enthusiasm growing as she explained. Thomas listened, feeling a mixture of pride and fear. His daughters were growing up, finding their own paths. But what if those paths led them away from him again? The doorbell interrupted his thoughts. Thomas opened the door and froze at the sight of who stood outside. Sophie stood there, looking smaller and more fragile than he remembered, but with a determination in her eyes he recognized. "Hello, Thomas," she said softly. May I speak to the girls?" The world seemed to stand still. Thomas looked at Sophie, then at his daughters, who watched the scene with wide eyes. In that moment, all the challenges, the elite school, the business crisis, dreams of Paris and environmental engineering, seemed to diminish compared to this new emotional territory. How would they navigate this new chapter? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain: their family's journey was far from over. The morning sun illuminated the central park of the city, where dozens of volunteers bustled about, setting up booths, organizing donations, and adjusting sound equipment. At the center of all this activity were Claire and Anne, their voices occasionally rising above the crowd to give instructions or answer questions. "Are you sure we put up enough banners?" Anne asked, her eyes scanning the area anxiously. Claire smiled, placing a reassuring hand on her sister's shoulder. "It's perfect, Anne. It's all going to be fine." The charity event for homeless children was the culmination of months of careful planning. The twins had devoted themselves body and soul to this project, determined to give back to the community and make a difference in the lives of children who, like them, had faced hardship. Thomas arrived shortly after Rice, carrying boxes of supplies. His face showed a mix of pride and anxiety. "Girls, you've done an incredible job here," he commented, looking around in wonder. The twins exchanged smiles. After recent challenges, this project had become a way for the family to reconnect, uniting them in a common purpose. It wasn't long before Marie and Pierre arrived, bringing a group of children from the local orphanage where they had begun volunteering. "Look at this," Marie exclaimed, her eyes shining with emotion. "You two are simply amazing." The twins ran to hug Marie and Pierre, the familiarity and affection evident in every gesture. Thomas watched with a gentle smile, grateful for the couple's continued presence in his daughters' lives. The event began in full swing. Children ran from booth to booth, their faces lit by rare smiles. There were games, food, free medical checkups, and most importantly, a palpable sense of hope in the air. It was amidst this atmosphere of celebration that Sophie arrived, hesitant and visibly nervous. She stopped at the park's entrance, unsure whether to proceed. Claire noticed her first. With a quick nod to Anne, she approached Sophie. "You came," Claire said, her voice neutral but not hostile. Sophie nodded, swallowing hard. I wanted to help, if you'll let me." Anne joined them, her eyes studying Sophie carefully. After a tense moment of silence, she spoke. "There's a clothing distribution booth that could use an extra pair of hands." Relief flooded Sophie's face. "Thank you," she whispered, following Anne to the booth. As the day wore on, a curious dynamic began to form. Thomas, Marie, Pierre, and Sophie, once divided by painful circumstances, found themselves working side by side, united by the shared desire to support Claire and Anne. During a break, Claire gathered the courage to make an announcement she had been planning for weeks. "Dad," she began, drawing Thomas's attention, "I've made a decision about my future." Thomas looked at her expectantly. "I want to study environmental engineering," Claire continued. "I want to use what I've learned to develop sustainable solutions for disadvantaged communities." The pride on Thomas's face was unmistakable. "Claire, that's wonderful. You'll do incredible things, I'm sure." Anne, inspired by her sister's courage, decided to share her own decision. I decided to postpone my studies in Paris," she announced. "I want to stay here and keep working on projects like this one. There's so much to do in our own community." Marie and Pierre exchanged emotional glances, clearly touched by the twins' compassion and dedication. Sophie, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "If you'll let me, I'd like to volunteer to help in future projects. I know I can't undo the past, but I want to be part of a better future." There was a moment of tension, all eyes on Claire and Anne. The twins looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Claire nodded. "We accept your offer, Sophie. Everyone deserves a second chance." Thomas, observing the interaction, felt an idea forming. "What if we expand this?" he suggested. "Marie, Pierre, you have invaluable experience working with vulnerable children. With Claire's engineering knowledge and Anne's artistic talents, we could create something truly meaningful." Enthusiasm was tangible as everyone began discussing possibilities. The idea of a foundation combining social assistance, education, and sustainable development began to take shape. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, Claire and Anne stepped aside, watching the scene before them. "Did you ever imagine we'd get here?" Anne asked softly. Claire shook her head, a gentle smile on her lips. "Not in my wildest dreams. But I'm grateful we did." The sisters linked arms, feeling the weight of their years of struggle, pain, and, finally, healing. The future that stretched out before them was bright, full of possibilities, and, more importantly, filled with love. As they returned to join their newly expanded and reconciled family, Claire and Anne knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together, stronger than ever. The rising sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, illuminating the modern facade of the building housing the new Pathways Foundation. At the entrance, a colorful mosaic made from recycled materials displayed the foundation's logo, two intertwined hands forming a heart. Claire, now 20, walked through the glass doors, her determined footsteps echoing in the lobby. 2 years had passed since the charity event in the park, and the dream born that day had flourished beyond their wildest expectations. "Good morning, Mrs. Claire." The security guard greeted her warmly. Claire returned the smile, remembering how this man, once homeless, was one of the first beneficiaries of the Foundation's programs. On the 3rd floor, she found her sister Anne leaning over a large drawing table, surrounded by enthusiastic children. "And so," Anne explained, her eyes shining with passion, "we can turn something that would have been thrown away into a unique work of art." The children watched in awe as Anne demonstrated how to create a sculpture from plastic bottles and other recycled materials. Claire observed for a moment, her heart overflowing with pride. Anne had found her calling, using her art not only to create beauty but to inspire and educate. "Anne," Claire called softly, not wanting to interrupt, "the meeting starts in 10 minutes. Anne nodded, bidding the children a fond farewell before following her sister to the conference room. Inside, Thomas was already seated at the head of the table, reviewing documents. Seeing his daughters enter, his face lit up with a smile. "Good morning, my stars," he greeted them warmly. Marie and Pierre arrived soon after, bringing the aroma of fresh coffee and croissants. "We thought everyone could use a boost," Marie explained, distributing the treats. Pierre, now the logistics director of the foundation, began a presentation on new recycling projects in underprivileged communities. "Thanks to the system Claire developed," he explained, projecting graphs onto the screen, "we increased collection efficiency by 40% last quarter." Claire blushed slightly at the praise. Her work in environmental engineering had revolutionized the foundation's approach to sustainability, creating innovative solutions implemented in dozens of communities. The meeting continued, with each team member sharing updates and ideas. The dynamic between them was fluid and respectful, forged over years of working together. When the door opened softly, everyone turned to see Sophie enter, carrying a stack of folders. "Sorry I'm late," she said quietly. "I was finalizing the rehabilitation program reports." Thomas gestured for her to join the table. The path to reconciliation had been long and at times painful, but Sophie's commitment to redemption and her tireless work at the foundation had slowly rebuilt bridges that once seemed irreparably burned. As Sophie shared the impressive results of the ex-offender rehabilitation program, Claire and Anne exchanged glances. There was a mix of pride and deeper understanding in their eyes. The past wound, though never forgotten, no longer defined or limited them. After the meeting, the family gathered for an informal lunch on the foundation's terrace. The atmosphere was relaxed, full of laughter and lively conversations. "Remember when we thought this was just an impossible dream?" Anne asked, gesturing at the building around them. Claire smiled, recalling the nights spent planning and dreaming. "And now, look at us, making a difference, one day at a time." Thomas watched his daughters with tearful pride. "You two are extraordinary," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You turned a tragedy into something beautiful and meaningful." Marie and Pierre, holding hands, nodded in agreement. "You taught us the true meaning of family," Marie added softly. Sophie, who had remained quiet, finally spoke. I just want to say how grateful I am for this second chance, for being part of something so incredible." There was a moment of emotional silence, each person reflecting on the journey that brought them here. Later that day, as the sun set, painting the sky in vibrant hues, Claire and Anne found themselves alone on the terrace, watching the city below. "Sometimes I still have to pinch myself," Anne confessed, leaning her head on her sister's shoulder, "to believe it's all real." Claire nodded, understanding perfectly. "We went through so much," she reflected. "There were moments I thought we wouldn't survive, but we did," Anne completed. "And more than that, we thrived." The sisters remained silent for a moment, remembering the landfill, the cold nights, the years of uncertainty and fear. "You know what impresses me most," Claire finally said. "How we managed to turn all that pain into something positive. We're really making a difference, Anne." Anne smiled, tears of gratitude shining in her eyes. "And we have a family. A strange, complicated family, but full of love." Claire laughed softly. "Definitely not conventional, but it's ours." They watched as the first stars began to appear in the night sky. Below them, the city lights twinkled, reminding them of the countless lives their work touched. "I'm proud of us," Claire said softly. "Me too," Anne replied, squeezing her sister's hand. In that moment, bathed in twilight and a sense of accomplishment, Claire and Anne felt profound gratitude. Gratitude for the journey that brought them here, for the people in their lives, and for the chance to create a better future not only for themselves but for so many others. The future stretching before them was bright and full of possibilities. Although they knew they would certainly face more challenges ahead, they were sure of one thing. Together, with their unconventional family by their side, they could overcome any obstacle. As the stars shone above, Claire and Anne embraced, their hearts filled with hope, love, and the certainty that, no matter what destiny held, they would always have each other and the family they had built against all odds.